Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. From the author of Vampire, The Richard Chase Murders, and The Bundy Murders, comes an excursion into the truly weird and the bizarre. From medieval-esque murder in a small-town museum to the jilted boyfriend who decided that his former girlfriend needed to die on her 21st birthday. And then there's the demented son who returns home to live with his mother and stepfather, and one night in their beautiful mansion sitting atop a high bluff overlooking the Ohio River, slaughters them. The book that we are featuring this evening is Kentucky Bloodbath, 10 Bizarre Tales of Murder from the Bluegrass State, with my special guest, journalist and author, Kevin Sullivan. Welcome back to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Kevin Sullivan.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's always good to be on your show.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you again, Kevin, and congratulations on your latest truly bizarre collection here from Kentucky. So just tell us, I guess we just had you on recently with another collection from Kentucky, but tell us just basically what was your criteria this time out to be able to select the 10 stories that are in Kentucky Bloodbath?
All of these stories go back to the time when I was, for a number of years, when I was doing research into strange Kentucky murders, and I was going through case files and court records, and you run into a lot of stuff when you do that, obviously. But I was looking for some of the more bizarre cases, strange cases that had twists to them, just things that would just jump out of you from the page when you're looking at the case file. And the other book that we talked about a number of months ago was Death of a Cheerleader, and that had 6 different bizarre cases in it. And so this is a continuation of that, and these cases were, some of them, as I had mentioned before with the other book, would have kind of been lost to history had I not gone in there and pulled these things out. Some would be well known, and that I'm sure reporters would periodically, write about them. Certain cases, like the Iceman, having to do with Todd Ice, but most of the cases were very big and had an effect on the area where these happened at the time. But over the years, these things had a tendency to kind of, drift away, and then, of course, they end up in archives, and most people forget about them. And so I was always glad to find something interesting, that I could pull out and put to the page.
Well, let's set the stage right now with Carol Frances Mudd, and she's 22 years old, and she's working at the Stone Castle Museum in a small place called Bardstown, Kentucky. This is November 1982. In this museum, they have toy soldiers and antique weapons. And you introduce the character Anthony Russell Gowan, or Tony.
Correct.
And he's 20 years old. So you take us right to where the mailman, the postman, Charles Meredith, is walking by, and Anthony Russell Gowan. So set the stage for us for Death by Sword. Yes.
Gowan was a strange individual. He was obsessed with edged weapons, especially swords. And what he did that morning, and the authorities don't know why he did it, but he was the first person to come into the museum in Bardstown, and like you say, they had these these displays of toy soldiers and battlefields, but they also had displays of like knights in armor, and like they had a broadsword, and they had various displays. So for a small town like Bardstown, which is famous for my old Kentucky home, it was a nice place, the Stone Castle Museum. He ended up there on the really the day after Halloween, and November 1st, and I don't know whether I don't think he signed in, but I think he walked in. And the woman that was working there, she was all by herself. It never came out how exactly this happened, but she ended up being murdered. And what Gowan did was he had taken a broadsword from one of the displays, and he had thrust that thing down through the top of her shoulder into her midsection. And as I recall, it pierced her heart, or severed maybe a valve in her heart. It had done an extensive amount of damage. I'm sure she died very quickly. And of course, he, I don't know how he managed not to get blood on himself, but he did. And what was weird is that two brothers had shown up at the museum a little bit later, and they came in there, and they hadn't, they were waiting to pay the price of admission, and nobody was there, so they just started walking around the place. And one of the brothers had gone upstairs, and I think one had stayed in like the bookstore area, and he came back, and he had his brother follow him upstairs because he saw something that bothered him. And a lot of times when people will see bodies, if they come upon something horrific like this, a lot of times they won't often know it's a real body. Sometimes it'll be obvious, and sometimes it won't. And he couldn't believe what he was seeing when he found her. So he had his brother, follow him back up, and of course, she was quite dead. So that became a mystery as to what happened to this girl. And Gowan wasn't arrested until a long time later. And in fact, as I recall, the guy who broke the case was a detective. I think he was a suspect for a while, but they didn't have anything solid on him. But a cold case detective, he came along later, and he got to work back on that case, and ended up interviewing a number of Gowan's friends and stuff, and girls he dated, and he was able to put more together about this. And what came from some people that knew him was quite strange, especially the women he dated. And like the one girl had said that he liked to have rough sex, and sometimes he would like to choke her, but not into like unconsciousness. But she said something weird too, like he would say sometimes he'd like to imagine himself to be a doctor, or perhaps a soldier, or some type of authority figure. And he was just quite strange. And later, when the cops got on his trail, he lived I believe it was next door to a Kentucky State Trooper. And this trooper had witnessed him one time out when he had set up some boxes. He had some cardboard boxes, and he had taken a sword he has. I don't know if it's a Japanese sword or whatever, but he was whipping this thing all around in different directions. He was quite good with the sword. And, turn around and put his back to the boxes and slice beside him into the sword, and then he would switch around and do something else, and he would just whack these boxes up really quickly. And, the cop took notice of that. But eventually, he was apprehended through some things that he did. I don't want to get the whole story away, but because I know people will enjoy reading this, but it's got a lot of twists in it. And if you can imagine those two brothers coming in there, how creepy that must have been to be met with silence only to find her dead body. And for quite some time, this was an unsolved case. So Bardstown is rather small. And so that probably sent a nice little shockwave through the community. And if people weren't locking their doors, they soon would be. So it's a very interesting tale.
You've got a detective. You speak of a detective, Robert Foster, who took on the case after about 2.5 years. Like you say, it was cold for a while, even though they had suspicions, obviously. But what was interesting is all the claims made from all the... Foster just happens to go talk to his ex-girlfriends. And with that comes a wealth of information, like fascinating stuff like he's fascinated with Dungeons and Dragons, the occult, martial arts, and edged weapons, like you said. But he's also, according to Rosemary Lawrence, one of his exes, he's a member of a black cult, devil worship.
Yes.
So there's a lot going on here. And then when you talked about the crime scene itself, you say in the book that this broadsword, not everybody knows what a broadsword, but I imagine it's a big sword like something from the medieval days, but 3 feet tall. So it's a 3-foot sword that was put through her. She was, she was impaled on this thing, and then her throat was cut with a dagger.
A dagger.
So there was,
in fact, the broadsword. If people don't know, I'll explain. They're so large that they're basically two-handed weapons. It's not like you would stand there and joust with it, or just do it like put one hand behind your back like you see people fencing. No, broadswords were very long and they were very heavy, and they're like battle swords, and they carry a lot of weight, and they're sharp on both sides of the blade, and boy, you can really do some damage with those things. And so to think about that, he didn't just pierce her like with a straight-on stick, like in her stomach. He brought that thing that way down. He must have had her like on the ground on her knees. I don't know how he did it, but he got that thing down through the top of her shoulder and rammed it all the way down. So I think, as I recall, I think the autopsy report talked about how quickly she died. I think I put that in the story, but I remember reading it in the case file because of the piercing of her heart or something.
What also was very fascinating, and because you don't see this in a lot of cases, I mean, there's some talk of it maybe at trial, but this is some interesting evidence in this case where when the police sees some evidence from this guy, they seize a satanic Bible. Well, that's not your run-of-the-mill thing. Books on rituals, witchcraft, and notebooks containing satanic writings and drawings. So this guy was very serious.
Yeah, he was. He was. In fact, he was, by the time Foster caught up with him, he was in the Marine Corps, and he was about to be kicked out. He was having some drug issues and really some other issues as well. So, his girlfriends, as I recall, they didn't have a whole lot of good things to say about him. But, it said, a member of the black cult. She goes on to say, which is devil worshiping. So he was a very strange individual. And if you remember, he basically confessed on the way home after he was taken from, not Pendleton, that's California, but it's the one on the East Coast, the Marine base. He basically, he talked about hearing a roaring in his head, remember? He said
but he also said
like the sound of a lawnmower.
Yeah, he also said he was on Quaaludes, and he also said he couldn't remember. So let's be fair. Yes, he could have said. He said I could have killed her. Can't remember. Yes. Had those Quaaludes roaring in my head like a lawnmower.
Yep. Yeah.
So
strange.
You open this book, and this is an incredible opening to a book, and we won't dwell on this because we've got to talk about all these other incredible stories. But again, what I find most fascinating, and some members of the audience have contacted me too, because there's a gap in some of the true crime stories. There's many bizarre and unbelievable stories, this is one that really has this otherworldly almost effect to this, where you have what was found on Carol Mudd's body and originally was a back part of a brooch, like a pin attachment.
Yes.
And they didn't know really what it was, but they knew that they had it in their possession. And later, when they did seize evidence from him, what they did find was the other part of that pin. So tell us what the significance of that pin was in continuum of our talk about the occult.
As I recall, it was something. It was like a satanic pin, was it not?
It was a satanic star. Yeah, it was a satanic star pin.
Yes, yes. And so, this is something. So he, I guess, placed this. I don't know. To be honest, I can't remember. I'm not sure I don't even know if it came out, if he placed it on her body or if he accidentally left it at the scene. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But I
didn't really say
that.
in your book. It didn't really say in your book, but what it said was the star had two inverted crosses.
Yes.
And the number 666, and it was on a small gold broadsword pin that would, when they put the two pieces together, they fit perfectly, and that was an important in the trial as well to connect him further than he was already connected in this case. But again, you don't see.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now because, as I recall, it's the actual file is coming back to me. I've got written here. It talks about it was found on her. I don't think it was ever determined whether it was broken by accident or whether he left it as like a calling card. I don't think they ever made a determination of that. I'm not sure, but it was weird. And it, of course, they used that Therial microscope, and they did what was known a 10-point comparison. I mean, these things are usually very easy to match together whenever you have something that's been broken off, even though they've been separated by some distance. It doesn't matter when you bring it back together. It's a pretty easy to compare them and make a match. Of course, the opposing attorneys will always try to tear that down, but yeah, it was just it's weird. This whole case does have a different feel to it, because if you look at Gowan and you look at how strange he was in this satanic stuff, and then you look how that worked out among the people that knew him and these girlfriends, some of them were quite close to him and got to see him a lot. It's just a real different feel, and it's a different type murder, because most murders don't happen like this. They never did find out why he did it, and I'm not sure that they know exactly how he did it. They just know he did it, and what drove him to the museum to be the first one in there is anyone's guess. I don't think he ever talked about it.
No, but you say in the book that 4 months after the murder, just happened to write a little song called The Hunter. And also there was writings and drawings. We won't go into that, but needless to say, it sounds like a typical psychopathic killer to me.
Sure. Yes. Yes. And he's free today. I mean, I don't, as I recall, he was released. I don't know how much time he did, but he's out there somewhere. He's probably still in Kentucky.
Well, he received a 30-year sentence, so you would think if they had any provision for time off for good behavior of some sort, whatever that was, 86 to, so that would certainly be coming up to the 30 years, and if there was any kind of parole ability, all it said in your book, and again, what he was sentenced to was 30 years, and so we don't know exactly what Kentucky parole eligibility was or what the deal was exactly in that 30 years.
Yes.
Let's move to your next story where, again, completely different, but it's called Blood in the Moonlight, and this occurs December 9th, 1983. Albert and Mabel Bauer, and they're 63 years old. And this occurs in Louisville, Kentucky, and this is their annual Fraternity Order of Police dinner. And Albert is the deputy sheriff, and their son, Albert Jr., 29 years old, has had some problems, moved back with his parents. Tell us a little bit about Albert Jr. and the circumstances that led to him moving back in with his parents in Louisville, Kentucky.
Well, Albert, first of all, the home is, I have a picture of the home in the book. The picture doesn't really do it justice. It's a nice middle-class home. What you can't see is it's about a half a block from a neighborhood high school. I always like when, these high schools and stuff, would be right in the neighborhood. And it's a nice area. And it's low crime. And I don't know if they'd ever had a homicide. And Louisville does have a good number of homicides, but those usually occur in the western portion of downtown. When you get out into the suburbs, there are occasional homicides, but this was a particularly quiet area. And it just goes to show you that things can happen. The parents were apparently quite normal. They were getting up into their older years, and the son had, Albert Jr. had problems. I mean, he had battled mental problems, and he was also on drugs, and he had been living apart from his family, but decided to move back home. And there had been issues, and this is a terrible, terrible thing, but parents go through things like this, and they start having issues with their sons, or I guess in some cases daughters, but invariably it's with the son. And then they start showing some instability, and then they start showing instability with perhaps a penchant for violence. Parents don't always move as quickly as they should to take care of a situation, and some often believe that it won't really turn to violence. And so Bauer was living in their basement, and on this particular night, they had been to the lodge to have this dinner, and I know that Albert Sr., excuse me, he had a friend he spoke with that night. They were good friends, and so they came home, and I guess it was about maybe, I don't know, I think about, they probably came home around 11, something like that, maybe a little after. And Albert Jr. was out for the evening, and he had gone out and done some things, and he had run into somebody at a local bar, and the guy was kind of, joking with him about some things, and he became very hostile towards him, and he wasn't acting himself. I mean, people knew this, fellow had problems, but he was even acting a little bit strange to his friends as well. Well, so he goes home, and he slaughters his parents, and he actually calls in to the police by 1:15 that early next morning, and he tells the dispatch person there's been a murder. She asks where, and he gives the address, and the dispatch person asked Albert Jr. what happened. He said, I don't know. And then he just said, that he said both his parents are dead. And I've talked to the police officer that arrived on the scene first. The guy said he pulled up, and this fellow was, Bauer was standing out in the driveway. And if you look in the picture, it's on a hill. So I'm assuming Bauer's up probably by the top of the driveway, and it's a very moonlit night. And when the cop, rolled up on the scene, he's by himself. he said he looked at Bauer, and he said he looked like he had just something wet on his jacket. And of course, the cop gets out of the car and walks up to him, and he could see John's flashlight on it. It's covered with blood. And so he begins to tell the cop that his parents are dead. And so the cop goes in to the house. I believe they entered in through the kitchen. And, he's got his handgun out. And he's probably already suspicious as to, Albert Jr. But he sits him down in a chair and he tells him not to move. He tells him it's for his own safety. As they enter the kitchen, I've seen these. I've seen the crime scene photos. I wouldn't publish them, and they would. And these particular photos, they already told me you can't have these for publication. I said I don't need them. I just want to see what the detectives walked into. I always want to see what they see when they're entering a crime scene. But I don't ever publish really these horrific pictures. But the pictures, and I try to explain in the writing, and I think I do a good job with it, of just how bad it was. I mean, there was blood everywhere in the kitchen. The floor was covered with blood. The countertops, the cabinets, as I recall, there was some blood on the ceiling. The mother had numerous stab wounds. He had used several knives. He had used a type of fork on her. I think one of the knives was still sticking out of her, was bent. Clearly, it was a crime of rage. And, even this beat cop, I'm sure he knew that. I mean, once the detectives got there, they see things like this, and they know this is not some burglary gone bad. The father was laying in the living room. It looks like he was trying to make it to the front door, and he had been strangled to death. I think the cord was still around his neck, but he had also been hit in the head, and he actually had a dent in his head, like a wound in his head, and it corresponds with a like a mug. I think it was a pewter mug, if I recall. These stories were written so many years ago. That the detective matched it up, and it was a match to this thing in his head, and also a handgun, I think, had been fired in the house, but no one was hit from that. And so, you have these two dead people. Well, the police show up, and they know, it doesn't take them long. In fact, they brought a dog that, would track that. See, Bauer had made some claim that people had done it, they had left. And then, but when the canine officer brought his dog, the dog tracked the scent from, the door out, all the way back around, and it just didn't lead anywhere, like away from the house. And, it didn't take the cops too long to figure out, we've got somebody who has murdered his mother and father. But they didn't want to charge him yet with murder. So they charged him with possession of like Quaaludes or whatever and some drugs.
Yeah.
And what was strange is that his attorney, of course, he was arrested for that, taken downtown. I got a picture somewhere of him standing there at the police station with this blood on the jacket. And, so they're building a case on the murder thing, but they want to wait a little bit. So he makes bail, the family, the attorney, gets this guy out, right? And the detectives asked the judge to put a hold on him because he's a suspect in this murder thing. But because he hasn't been charged, the judge said, basically he said, my hands are tied because I can't stop him from making bail from this drug charge. So what the family did, he's not going to stay in that house. That house Now it's crawling with forensic people and just all kinds of people there. So he puts him up in what is known as the Galt House Hotel, which is a hotel in downtown Louisville that is 21, 22 stories, something like that. It's a pretty big, tall structure, maybe 24, I'm not sure. But he's up on like the 20th floor or something. I can't recall. But he's way up there, right? And so his attorney, places him there, informs the police where he is. So the police are working, to try to get everything they need to quickly charge this guy. Well, Bauer gets it in his head that for some reason he's going to take his own life. What he does is he gets back and he takes just a running leap and crashes through the window. And I say in the book he has a controlled fall. He did too. He didn't go end over end. He fell, he crashed through, and then started to drop. And as he started to drop, he maintained his position, and he went through the roof. I have to explain that the Galt House Hotel isn't just a straight hotel, but when you get down to the first floor, it expands out for conference rooms, and they kind of go out a little bit. It almost looks like you've ever looked at the UN building in New York, and so it comes down. It's high up, but it comes down and it expands, and the building goes out. Well, there was no way he was going to hit the pavement. He was going to hit the roof, and he did hit the roof, and he came through the roof, and his body was halfway hanging out of the roof. Now, nobody knows this guy's dead. This is done in the middle of the night. If I recall, I think it was around 4 a.m. or something. A maid had gone in there. She was doing something. It could have been around 2 or 4. And she hears water dripping, okay? And she hits the light, and there's Bauer. His clothes have been kind of, jeans have been kind of ripped off of him. His rear end is exposed. He's hanging through the ceiling. And, of course, he's dead. And so the police are called, and, they have to come and get him down. And when the detectives, when the homicide officers is notified, like, by then it's light, the next morning, and they said as they left the station, they looked over in the direction of the Galt House, and they could see a curtain flapping to an open window up in like what would be around the 20th floor, and they figured that was Bauer. That's where he jumped, and they were right. And so this guy had killed himself, and I've got some pictures in there of the dead body. I thought it was interesting that he was able to, control his fall. I don't know if he planned it that way, but he managed to travel all that distance and hit feet first.
It's interesting that you do mention that he was charged after his death posthumously for the murder.
Yes.
And convicted. Now, our next story is, you title it Rampage, and this is October 1st, 1973. And Geraldine Ewalt, she's 42 years old, and we're talking about Lexington, Kentucky. She was picking up her young daughter, at the Sayers School. And across from the school was a federal building. Third floor looked unassuming, but there was a prisoner holding for federal charges. And at around 4 p.m., there were several men walking on the roof of a loading dock, according to witnesses, and people thought they were doing official work. And there were 2 meter maids working. Anyway, he saw them jump from a third-floor window.
Yes.
After sawing through the bars. So tell us about this daring escape and how this Geraldine Ewalt and her daughter get all caught up in this rampage.
Yeah, the Lexington is the second biggest city in Kentucky, Louisville being the first. Louisville's a very large metropolitan area, and Lexington is a nice sized city, but I would call it more like a town. It's nice, and it's normally quiet, and these things don't normally happen there. They have homicides, but the federal breakout was real different, and the federal holdover, apparently, this guy named Wilmer Scott, he had gotten like a little hacksaw or something, and had been able to saw his way through a window, and maybe somebody else had started this. I don't know how long it took to get this done, but he had gotten out on the roof, and two other men had gotten on there with him, William Sloan, and then another guy named Collins. And Sloan said, that there was no way to get down. It was a nice day, but there was no way to get down. They were just going to have to jump. And so Scott just, he said, I couldn't get off the roof. I kept walking around, and everybody was looking. People and a couple of marshals pulled in, and people were staring from across the street. So I just backed up about 30 foot, I'm quoting him, and closed my eyes and just run till there was nothing under me. And, of course, he just dropped off, and he was fine. William Sloan soon followed him, and he was fine. But this is so strange. But this other fellow named Collins, he tried to get off the roof without hurting himself, and he sat on the ledge, and as gently as possible, he dropped to the ground. He broke his leg. He should be glad, though, he broke his leg, because these other guys would go on to commit murder, and he wouldn't be charged with that. But so anyway, and so the meter maids see this, right? And they were quite upset because they knew these guys were going to get away. Well, the Sayre School sits very close to the federal building, and I got a picture of it in there. And what people would normally do is they would line up their cars all around this like circle, and the kids would come out, and they'd find their parents or whatever, and off they'd go. Well, Ewald was waiting for somebody, that day, and her doors were, I guess, unlocked, and Sloan and Scott just got in there and commandeered the car and just took off, and they threatened her that they would take her life. It was Scott that was doing all the talking. Sloan was there, kind of like to go along with the ride. Yeah, he was just glad to be out of the lockup. But they ended up going to Ewald's house, and they then after they waited there a while. You can tell from some things that Scott said to her on the way out there. He was very paranoid. But then after that, they ended up, taking off, and it's very unfortunate because they ended up, and I don't know if they saw this girl or not, but they ended up getting inside of a minister's house, and he was not home at the time, but his daughter was, and the wife was in Louisville at a conference. Might have been a Methodist conference, and this guy was like, I think he might have been a Methodist, minister, and so the Scott and Sloan, they get into this guy's house. They probably followed the girl, or get off a bus or something. I don't know, but they got into the home, and then when the father came home with the son, of course they were already inside, and they, bound them up and made them sit. And apparently, when these things happen to people, the best thing that people can do is to survive, is to go along with it and try to maintain a calm attitude. And I think the minister had a tough time doing that because Scott would later tell investigators that this guy was cussing them and he was saying all kinds of things. And Scott warned the minister. They're tired and they're on the run, and I mean they're dangerous people, and he shouldn't be doing that. And he said, you're sitting there, cursing, and you got guns in the house, and you got whiskey in the house, and you call yourself a minister, and you're cussing us. And so apparently that agitated Scott quite a bit. And of course, as is often the case, the girl ended up being raped. But the friction between the father, the minister, and Scott just kept kind of like escalating, and it turned into murder. And after a while, and Sloan did not commit the murders. Okay, it was Scott, but all three were killed. The minister and both the son and daughter. And then when they made the break, they made their way up to, I think it was Falmouth, Kentucky. And it was a guy there. I can't remember his name now, but it's in there. He was like the night clerk. Do you remember that? Where he had
there was actually it was Elva Harper was the night clerk.
Yes. Yeah, but he had a premonition like something was going to happen to him. And if you recall that. And he was killed there by Scott. And there were some contract workers that were staying at the hotel too, who were doing repairs in that area, and I think a couple of them were killed. And the whole point of this is that with a gun in his hand, Scott could commit murder and would not even bat an eye. It was easy for him to murder. It just didn't bother him. Later, when he was captured, he said, if I got out, I would do it again. But what I found interesting, and I also put this in the caption of this picture, but I said, a pure homicidal psychopath, Wilmer Scott had no trouble killing defenseless people, but refused to shoot it out with a single police officer. As far as I'm concerned, that speaks volumes of true cowardice in people. This man had no problem killing innocent people who were not armed. But when he and Sloan was confronted after this shooting in this hotel by this lone police officer, I kid you not, they gave up. He wouldn't shoot it out with him. It's amazing. And but yeah, pure sociopath. And so he got the death penalty, but he told them that he would not, he was going to take care of things himself, and he did. He actually started a fire and burnt himself up in his bed. It was a strange individual. I don't know how much time Sloan got. I'm sure he spent a long time because, as far as the law was concerned, he was an accomplice to all of this, and
sure,
I'm sure, he spent a long time in prison.
I think he got life without parole. The interesting thing was in this rampage, and we didn't talk about the kind of terror he inflicted right away when he kidnapped DeWalt, and she told him that she was waiting for her daughter, and so the things they told her they were going to do to her daughter, cut her up, rape her, and then the other rapes and murders. And it was interesting that the Reverend, incorrectly, he defied them and said things like, "You're going to go to the electric chair," which was too far off, but it didn't help his case. Regardless, these true psychopaths, in 10 hours, they had killed 6 people and wounded 2 of them seriously in simple 10 hours of rampage. Interesting, very interesting.
And you have to think that had the minister dealt with him differently, there's a good chance they all would have survived. I mean, there just is. I mean, he didn't kill Ewald. If this guy would have been even kind to him, just calming him, just being normal with him, they might have survived. But when you have that antagonism going off and name calling, I mean, the guy was just asking to be killed because you're dealing with a murderer that might not, kill you if you don't cross them and just let them do what they need to do. But he'll absolutely kill you if you start, causing them some problems. So it's a shame, but I think that may have contributed to their deaths.
Well, we'd never know exactly what they did say to the young girl, and if there was any indication what they said to the woman about their daughter, that maybe that didn't help either. So, I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I guess in the heat of the moment, he couldn't, be logical in his thinking process.
Right.
Now, our next story is the one called the Box Hill Murders, and this is June 1977. And Dennis Boehm, Jefferson County Police. There's a 911 call about a man gone berserk, and shots were fired. And so tell us a little bit about this case here, about and Kirk Ellington Tiff, 28 years old.
Just to set the stage here, this home is called Box Hill. It's a really nice estate. It is just a really pretty home. It is in a section east of Louisville. If you go out of downtown Louisville and you head out what is known as the River Road, and you travel east, it won't take long. Within about maybe 3 or 4 miles, you start hitting an area where these beautiful homes are, and it's a lot of just nice homes and areas that run along the river, the Ohio River. This is where a lot of old money is, and the publishing family, the Binghams, had a home out here, and it's just been a top spot for a lot of wealthy people in Louisville for as long as I can remember, from just many, many years ago. It's also a relatively quiet area. Okay, it doesn't seem to be a lot of homicides, and but the problems that were in this one home, a lot of times there would just be a man and his wife. But when the son came home, his name was Kirk Ellington Tiff, and he was a son who had many problems, and probably would have been diagnosed even then as a paranoid schizophrenic. He had problems for a number of years, and he had been living away, and he had come home, and as I recall, I think it was in the fall of that year, and it's almost cryptic, but his mother had written on the calendar, Kirk arrived this a.m. And it's a sad tale, because this is a young man who was clearly descending into madness. And there were times, and I remember from the police reports, there were times when he would just yell at his mother, threaten her, tell her what he was going to do, threatening violence. She was told by her attorney, you need to have him committed. There were other people that were aware of some things. They thought that they should do something about them. The man she was married to, Kirk's, stepfather, he was concerned, but he left, apparently from the record, he left a final judgment as to what should happen to their son, to the mom if she wanted to commit him. I mean, he would no doubt be all for that. The mom could not bring herself to do that, and she believed that that would hurt him greatly. She must have believed that he wouldn't harm her. But when you have somebody looking at you and they're foaming at the mouth and they're screaming and they're saying all these things that they're going to do, and it has to do with violence and murder, it's time to believe that that's real. But they were actually, right before they were murdered, they were packing up to move. And they were going to sell this grand home and move somewhere else. And they had a few close friends, and she had confided into to these women the problems she was having with her son, and all of them were in agreement that Shirley needed to do something about it. She just couldn't bring herself to do it. Now the father, he was, he wouldn't talk about it as much. But there were some times when he would confide in people, and he was more shut-mouthed about it. He didn't want to talk about it too much. They probably thought, if we can just weather the storm, it'll be okay. But they couldn't weather the storm because it erupted. And it erupted one night. And just like in the case of Albert and Mabel Bauer, they too were slaughtered in this beautiful home. And just recently, when we were putting the book together, I had to go up there and photograph it. It looks as nice today as it did back then. Interesting, back then here in Louisville, we had a thing when anybody ever called an ambulance, there would be a cop with it, which is very interesting. They had a number of years where they had that. Of course, they don't have that anymore. And when I was researching this case, I was talking to one of the cops who was a police officer at the time. He said, at the time this happened, there would be a police officer with any run like this, and right in the ambulance. And I said, yes, I was aware of that. And so I guess anything with the shots fired or anything like that. But it was, it's just interesting that something that horrible could happen here. Of course, after the murder, he takes his parents' car, takes whatever, I guess, money he can get. I mean, the place is a bloodbath, where these people were killed. And he drives to Denver, and he ditches the car near his father's place, his real father's place, and the police track him there, and and they talk to the dad. The dad said, "Well, he's not here anymore," and he had what he had done is he had cut his own hands, because as he was murdering his parents, they were trying to put up a fight, and apparently knives slipped or whatever, and he had cuts and some wounds on his own hands from where, like, the knife had slipping or something. So he was actually being worked on in Colorado. When I was doing the case, they got the case file in front of you, and a lot of times there's real evidence too, and so there were the car keys of the car we stole, and some other aspects, things he had on him during the time this happened. Well, to make a long story short, this kid was this young man was extradited. He didn't. He tried to fight in Spain, Colorado. Now, I have a personal connection to this case because this person would be judged too mentally ill to stand trial, and he was housed in a place called Central State Hospital. And I have a brother. He's dead now, but I had a brother who had blown his mind on drugs, and he too was at Central State Hospital. And so long before I wrote about this guy named Tiff, I would see him out there, and I said hello to him once or whatever. And my brother told a funny story. He said one morning, maybe a Sunday morning, whatever, he said, Tiff, after my brother had his breakfast, he said, Tiff, thought his food was poisoned and offered my brother his breakfast. My brother said, I knew it wasn't poisoned. I ate it. He said, Tiff just stood there waiting for me to fall over or something, but he didn't do it. But Tiff one day, and I write about this in there without talking about my brother or the connection there. Tiff goes in the bathroom and he gets a belt or something, something, I can't remember which. But it's on my brother's wing, okay, on this wing that they shared with other patients. He goes back in the bathroom and hangs himself. And by the time they get to him, he's brain dead. I mean, they put him on a respirator, but he was determined to be brain dead. So he had killed himself. Nobody really knew it until it was, too late. But it was weird. Then later, when I did the case, I knew exactly who that was because I had talked to him. It's the same way I had. We get to the thing called the Iceman. I had seen Todd Ice out there as well. But it was a strange case. And, I'm sure when people read the story, the book is actually selling very well and it's getting a lot of good reviews. And when you read the story, you almost you can just feel where this thing is going. Even before the parents are killed, you can just feel where it's going. And you want to be able to yell through the pages, do something. Get this kid committed. Whatever you have to do something. But Shirley Alexander would just never sign the order. So, so her son, Kirk Tiff, he just exploded one night, and then that was it. And it all happened in that beautiful estate that you can see to this day.
What I wanted to say, before we go wrap up this interview, what I wanted to say was the most fascinating part of this story was, for me, despite his clear-cut insanity, he was able to convince the father that he used to live with that there was nothing amiss. And his father drove him to the hospital. Right. When police contacted him, he didn't know anything about this and said, well, I'm not sure, but he was probably released from the hospital. And the very bizarre part of this story is that when the police went to the hospital, he was still there, lo and behold. Yeah. And so very, to me, when you're clear-cut insane, but yet have the composure like a psychopath to be able to go and, again, very, very interesting that people could do that you could fool your own father after you just slaughtered your mother and your stepfather. Yes. Again, for no good reason whatsoever. No. And a complete overkill. They weren't laying a stone in his path. I mean, they let him live there. He ate there. They weren't doing anything that could have even made him angry at them. And yet this was building in him. And it was, and I point out in the book, I describe how he just shouted out there and just, she should have believed it. She couldn't bring herself to believe that her son would kill her. But I think Albert and Mabel Bauer were in the same position. They didn't think their son would do that, but yet it happened. It's just a horrible thing. Yes, certainly. Now, we didn't get a chance to go. We just covered just 4 stories out of this incredible 10. There is a wide variety, right, like as we demonstrated here, from the insane killer with some twists and turns at trial to the guy with the Satanic Bible, and we have a host of other stories that really do qualify for weird and bizarre. I want to thank you very much, Kevin, for coming on. And for those that might want to explore other books that you have, I know you're with Wild Blue Press, and you have been published before that. So tell us where they might find out more information about your work, and also if they'd like to contact you and send you a message.
Sure. Okay. I have several publishers. I have been published by McFarland, Roman Littlefield. I'm publishing through Wild Blue Press right now. And what's nice about Wild Blue Press is that they, if you're looking for any of my books, they list them all on my webpage at wildbluepress.com. I also write true crime blogs at Wild Blue Press, and all of my stuff is archived. So I have quite a bit of material that you can come there and read and click into the archive, and it has listing of all my books. If anybody wants to fire me an email, if they have any questions or anything like that, you can also message me on at Wild Blue Press as far as if you're commenting on any of the stories. But if you want to contact me directly, it's Kevin _Sullivan, SULLIVAN 31 at yahoo.com. Again, that's Kevin _Sullivan at yahoo.com. Kevin _Sullivan 31 at yahoo.com. And so you can email me there. I always answer all of my emails, so I'll make sure it doesn't get lost in the mix anywhere, and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible if you have any questions or comments.
Well, it's been great talking to you, and I want to thank you again for coming on, talking about Kentucky Bloodbath, 10 Bizarre Tales of Murder from the Bluegrass State. I hope to talk to you again real soon. I know you are a real prolific writer, so I'm sure we'll be talking to you again real soon.
All right. Well, listen, Dan, thank you so much. It's always a joy to be on the show, and I will see you on the next show, as they say. All right.
Thank you, Kevin. You have a great night.
Right.
Good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.